Hi, Ginny. Welcome back to the Transcendent Minds podcast. And in this episode of the series that we're doing on somatics, can you talk about the profound role of somatic healing and self discovery and how we can learn to decipher the language as a gateway to transformation?
Absolutely. I would say the first two episodes that we've recorded so far have been, to me, like setting the foundation, getting the lay of the land of exactly what it is that we're talking about. I would also think the next one that's coming up too is getting much more into the nitty gritty of what exactly you can do on a daily basis to start engaging with this material and learning the language that the body uses to communicate with us, what exactly that looks like, what can I do on a practical level.
Great. So we're going to explore how recognizing and unraveling our conditioning and our beliefs can pave the way for profound healing and growth, and how our triggers can serve us to a deeper self understanding. And I invite everyone to join us on this exploration because I have Ginny Hoyt here, who's a visionary leader in the field of embodied awareness and transformation. So, welcome, Ginny, and thank you for joining us. So, through this journey of self discovery and healing, you've obviously gained profound insights into the power of somatics that unlocks the full potential, or a potential at least, of the human experience. And in this episode, I think we're going to start to unveil the power of naming and reclaiming our triggers and explore the echoes of our past experiences in our present interactions and cultivate self trust and compassion as foundational pillars of our healing journey. Is that a fair assessment?
That's exactly where I would love to take this conversation. I love the way that you worded that too. Echoes of the past feels very reminiscent of exactly what this journey is taking a look at what patterns we've been playing out from our past that are impacting our present day life and just being able to start connecting those dots and noticing like where these things came from, if these are things that I intentionally want to keep playing out and maybe embody something that feels a little bit more aligned for me.
Yes, I think in the journey of personal growth and healing, one of the most profound but often overlooked aspects is the understanding and integration of semantics, or the language of the body, because our bodies carry a repository of experiences and beliefs and traumas, and they shape our responses, they shape our agency, they shape our behaviors in ways that we may not even realize. And when we embark on the path of embodied awareness, we start to journey and delve into a rich landscape of sensations and emotions and memories to unearth the hidden narratives that govern our lives. And those narratives are woven into the fabric of our thoughts and our actions, and they stem from the conditioning and the beliefs that we've absorbed from childhood into adulthood. They become the silent architects of our reality. They shape our perceptions, they shape our decisions and our relationships. When we start to recognize and unravel our conditioning and beliefs, this can serve as a guiding light for others on their journey of self discovery and healing, which in turn helps them to become much more aware of the influences that these patterns have had on their lives. How do you believe that recognizing and unraveling our conditioning and our beliefs can serve as a guiding light for others on their journey of self discovery and healing?
I think that when one person starts taking a look at what's been swept under the rug and bringing all of those skeletons out of the closet for themselves and processing and bringing light to that and recognizing that is what's happening. Doesn't have to be exactly expressed to other people. That's a journey that you're on and that's work that you're doing. But it's incredible how much your energetic body shifts as you start doing these things, that you have more capacity for your authentic expression to be present with people. that they might not be able to put to words what feels different about you, but as a direct result of this type of work, they can feel like, wow, she's so much more calm or grounded or present or really taking up her space in a way that feels very magnetic. I believe this is the type of work that humans have incarnated on earth to do, is to process this type of karmic charge and transcend these types of limitations. And I think it feels really magnetizing when you can resonate with someone on that level of like, oh, they're doing this work, they're processing these things, and they are in a state of being or a state of awareness that feels really good to be around. And I think that's the reason why, is that there's this like recognition of like, this is where I'm meant to be too. This is like the place that all of us are meant to be working towards. And when we can recognize subconsciously that people are doing this work, it feels really inviting and sparks some curiosity around what is it that they're doing differently that is manifesting this type of change. It can be really inspiring for people, even if they might not exactly be able to put the words to what it is that feels different about you or really understand what is the significance of the work that you're doing. But I think there is something that's really undeniable, that it just feels good to be around people who have this type of ownership and clarity of self and can move through the world in their alignment and be that steady, stable pillar of presence.
Yeah, the work I've been doing over many years has made me much more aware of my own conditioning, and I've always examined them, but I'm constantly paying closer attention to how they've been shaping my agency. And I'm curious to know if you've noticed any conditioning or beliefs that have been silently guiding your life and how you see them playing out in your daily experiences.
There are so many different influences and different factors we could dive into here. One that I have just become reacquainted with recently, so I can dive into that one, is a part of self who derives a lot of self-worth from productivity. That is something that I have been able to like trace back to early conditioning and a belief that I not only witnessed in the people that I was growing up around, but was very much verbally also affirmed to me. That is how you make purpose in the world. I've noticed it's really incredible the sneaky ways these things can come around, that I had conscious awareness. That was a belief that I have had experience with and have done work around. But it's been interesting to me also to notice that recently it's been popping up in a much more subtle way, where I can feel this energetic sense of almost relentless forward motion, that once I've accomplished something, it does not feel like I need to take space to take my foot off the gas pedal, but it's just like on to the next. There's more to do. If you feel like you have any capacity to do it, then we should do it. And that sense of obligation, if you can, then you should, rather than allowing spaciousness for me and my body to relax and celebrate and integrate what it is I've already accomplished. That can be one example of, yeah, a way that past belief and experience, but that was very much a heavy pattern, much more so in my earlier life, where it was really relentless. Like I just lived off of a to-do list. And that was the only way I felt like I was good enough. In the way that I spent my day was determined by how many things got checked off the checklist. Even though I have done work around it, the intelligence of these parts of self are fascinating, that they can still creep up in these really subtle ways. And that makes it a challenging but interesting tool to keep honing, and how you can recognize how and when these things will play out. Because it's not necessarily that you've addressed it once, it's gone forever. These are deeply rooted parts of self that, as we've touched on in earlier episodes, are just here to, they just want to keep you safe. They want to make sure that you're okay. And yeah, that they can pop up little different ways and little different spaces of your life. So that's just one example that I always knew was there. I knew she was there, but has been popping up a little bit more recently for me.
It's interesting because they're subtle and secretive. Unless you're self aware and you are awake, like an awakened awareness, you don't notice it's happening because it's happening beneath your conscious awareness. But when you catch yourself in the moment, which is what I do, and I appreciate you doing that as well. It's like, oh, okay, I recognize that pattern. I realize I've got my foot on the gas, so I need to take a moment. I often ask myself this question: what is the body for? Sure, we can dress it, we can use it in various ways, but what is its actual purpose? This is a rhetorical question I've been pondering in terms of how I utilize my body. Do I use my body for love? Do I use it for active recovery? Do I use it for anger? Do I use it for pride? Do I use it to attack? So, what is the body truly for? I understand, without descending into cliches, it's about love. It's about expressing love, not in a romantic or intimate sense, but just pure love. And when we take care of our bodies and we show them love, whether it's through rest and recovery, active or passive, when we start to give the body that nourishment, we are demonstrating love and nurturing the body and nourishing the body. Diving into the work that you're doing has made me ponder. And I'd never thought about it in this way before.
Yeah, I like that answer. As you were sharing, I was also thinking exactly how I would answer that one as well. And I had initially chosen different words, but hearing you elaborate, I do think I have a similar belief that I really think of it as like a tool of communicating with higher power, higher intention. It is our work to clear the energetic blocks that are present within us that kind of keep us from that connection. And that type of work of dedication to going back and really rooting out the weeds and taking a look at the really tough and challenging places inside of there very much is an act of love. And being able to move through those things, I think also requires a lot of love, that we need to be able to bring lightness to those dark parts of self to help them transmute through that potentially negative charge that they hold, to help us transcend those parts of self that are keeping us stuck in dysfunction and from that place of higher connection. But to me, yeah, love is infused all throughout that process. Love of self, love of the system that we're a part of, commitment to that connection of higher power, and having so much love and reverence for that connection, I think is all part of that system, that it is like the WD-40 of that process that just gets everything moving, getting that energy flowing and bringing us into the place that I believe we were meant to resonate at. One that is very much compassion and love in a conditionless sort of sense.
Well, I've got this little olive tree in my backyard, and it got me thinking about how we take care of ourselves, because during winter, this tree's been tucked away in the shade, just waiting for its moment. And when that sunshine finally breaks through, I can't wait to bring it out into the sunshine. It's like watching a kid at Christmas. You give that tree some sun, a little TLC, and it takes a deep breath. It expands, it blooms, and all that potential that was cooped up during the winter months, it just bursts out. And we're not so different. When you think about it, if you have a goal, I prefer the term promise rather than goal, or if you have an idea and you really pour your attention into it, so you have an intention and you marry that with attention, it's like giving that tree some sunshine, you're nurturing it. So you have focus. So intention and attention equals focus. And when you match up what you want with where you're putting your energy, where you're putting your focus, that's when the magic happens. Because your focus is like a superpower for getting stuff done. But for me, here's the kicker. We're often rubbish at doing this for ourselves because we have this whole guilt trip going on, like taking time for ourselves, like some kind of crime. Oh, I can't possibly go for a massage, or I can't go on a retreat. I'm too busy, or it's just too selfish. But that's nonsense. You think about the weekends and you think about the working week. We slog through the week thinking, just got to make it to Friday, just got to make it to Saturday, then I can relax. But I think that's backwards. because we should be charging our batteries first. So we've got the juice to do the holy work, the stuff that really matters. Maybe it's time we treat ourselves more like my olive tree. We give ourselves some sunshine. We give ourselves some care and watch how we grow.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that metaphor about filling your own cup before you can give to others fits into this really well too. Especially with this busyness part that I had mentioned, this part of myself that just wants to be busy and that makes me feel like I'm spending my time wisely. That feels important to touch on is that there's a difference between movement and progress. That you can just be going through life, going through your 5-day work week, doing all the things where your cup might be, pretty depleted and there's not really much there for you to give on, but you're hustling through because of a sense of obligation. I feel like I have to, and this is what's expected of me. But I think when you can learn to make that shift to really emphasize pouring into yourself first, when you can give from that space of overflow, the work that you do from that space is so much more impactful and worthwhile and aligned in your best interest and the best interest of others around you because you are showing up as the best version, the most resourced version of you, rather than someone who's running off of adrenaline and an empty cup. I think a lot of people can get stuck in that if I'm moving and if I'm just doing things, then that's good. If you look at the quality of the work that's being done, maybe you did 100 things, but if you really gave yourself the spaciousness to feel really good and resourced and prioritize that sense of well-being, that you can instead take one really good step and have made it farther along in the process of what you're trying to achieve rather than just like ping-ponging around doing a bunch of things that maybe didn't really matter as much and aren't actually getting you closer to your goal, but are feeding this part of self that's like, I just have to stay busy. I just have to do things, which ends up depleting you in the process of it all. Making that delineation, the difference between movement and progress, that we can be super busy and we can be running ourselves exhausted and we might not actually be working towards our goals in the way we feel like we might be. But yeah, learning to pour into yourself first. And when you take action, making it meaningful. Make sure that it's something that you can feel really good about. And that type of clarity of what exactly that looks like can only come from a place, an energetic space, a mind space that feels really good and really grounded and really connected to see what is the next best step for me in this place. And then having the resource to do it into completion.
Here's the question. Are you delusionally busy or are you effectively busy? Because there's a difference.
It can be a really tricky space initially to figure that out. It's interesting for me now in hindsight of having recognition that this part of myself has been sitting in the driver's seat for the last maybe couple of months or so, that there's quite a bit of work that I had done at the moment felt, oh, like I've really spent my day. I look back on and probably this isn't the best work that I could have done. And I would rather create 3 really great things than 12 things that I look back on and I'm like, this is fine, but this isn't really a true representation of the power that I can hold or have. Another part of this too is having a lack of clarity of exactly the direction that we are wanting to go. That I think there's a lot of people who are just stuck in their 5 days a week routine instead of having capacity to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of, is this really where I want to be for the long term? What does that look like? What are the steps that would be required for me to get there? It can be really hard to break out of that mindset of where you've been, where you're comfortable with, and in that habit.
It's about being delusionally busy. It's like being on a hamster wheel, running your heart out. Your heart's bouncing out of your rib cage and you feel like you're moving towards something. But in actual fact, you're not getting anywhere. And that's a trap we can all fall into. We feel like we're making progress just because we're exhausted at the end of the day. But are we moving the needle forward? What is going to push that needle forward? It's like setting your internal GPS before you go to sleep. You're not demanding a specific outcome as such, but you're pointing yourself in the right direction, and that's powerful stuff. Let's talk about triggers. Triggers to me are like earthquakes. They're like inner earthquakes. They show up out of nowhere and they shake everything up. But they're also like treasure maps if we're brave enough to follow where they lead, because they can show us parts of ourselves we never knew existed. And we often try to avoid triggers or push them away. But what I'm suggesting, and I think you're suggesting this as well, is to welcome them in like unexpected guests at a dinner party. Sure, they might cause a little bit of chaos, but they may also bring gifts and insights into our deeper selves. Then we have to look at the power of language. And I accept language is nuanced, especially when we put words to our triggers and defense mechanisms. But we're taking back control. We're saying, I see you. I understand you. I'm not letting you run the show anymore. It's like being able to name and tame the monster under the bed, because suddenly it's not so scary anymore. So when we help people find the words to describe their experiences, their triggers, their defenses, we're actually handing them a superpower. We're giving them practical tools to rewrite their own story, as distinct from being a character pushed around by unseen forces. They become the author of their own lives. When I consider the power of language in naming and reclaiming of triggers and defense mechanisms, how do you see this practice in terms of empowering others to rewrite their narratives and reclaim agency over their lives?
This process of diving into triggers and creating that linguistic map for yourself for understanding the types of patterns we've been playing out is a non-negotiable. Being able to fully step into your fullest expression of self and show up as the person you really want to be. This is looking into the closet. This is pulling the rug over and looking at what has been swept under there. And I don't think you can build off of a foundation that has all this lumpy, unaddressed stuff, that whatever you try to build on top of that is not going to be stable and secure and real and grounded until we have taken out the clutter underneath it all that is going to pop up and potentially sabotage the progress that you're trying to make. And yeah, I love the way that you worded triggers being like these signposts. I think I've used that exact language myself for work that needs to be addressed. That can feel confronting at first because these might be parts of our personality we might not want to accept are there. Maybe these are really ugly parts of self that it feels a little crunchy to be like, yeah, I have some parts of myself that are really unflattering and I don't want anybody to know that exists within me. To that, I would say that humans are incredibly complex creatures, and absolutely every single one of us has these deep, dark, ugly shadows that, as you mentioned, hold beautiful golden nuggets of truth that are necessary to integrate into this fullest expression of self. That even within the shadows of trigger, there are gifts that exist in there. For an example, this part of myself that feels this need to be productive all the time, I am a very motivated person because of that part. That when I have a goal, I am pretty ruthless about going after it. I'm very decisive and I don't let go until I've gotten what it is that I'm looking to do. So there is that sticky part of it that feels like I need to do this for my self-worth, that when I can address and give that part the reassurance that we don't need to do this for self-worth, I am inherently worthy, and no matter how many things I check off a to-do list is going to change the amount of worth that I have. There is a gift within of ruthlessly convicted part of myself that works towards goals. Even though it can feel like we want to push away these triggers, that these are ugly parts of myself I don't want to look at, recognizing each and every single one of those has something really beautiful, a beautiful, unique gift within it that you do want to cultivate and can only step into its fullest expression when we can meet the needs of the part that is stuck in some of that crunchy, sticky, unmet emotional need, for us to integrate all the beauty of it. That is the process of stepping into fullest self-expression, is meeting those needs, working through the crunchy stuff, and addressing what is asking to be addressed so that the beautiful parts can take the stage and be what you embody on that day-to-day practice.
That's why awareness is key, because what I've come to realize is that triggers are based on reacting to a historical mechanism. And if I'm not aware of that historical mechanism, it just runs its pattern, it runs the show. But when I'm aware of it, I can redirect it as distinct from the trigger controlling me. When I can recognize it, I can reflect on it. And reflecting on the trigger, I can then redirect it. I can rebuild it. I can rewire. I can reset. Now, when you reflect on the recent triggers that you've experienced, how do you envision sharing this experience to help others understand the transformative power of diving deep into their inner landscape?
Yeah, part of the process of being able to make the most, in my opinion, out of the charge that triggers hold does start with the simple acknowledgement that it's there. And like I mentioned, that they can be very sneaky, that a pattern that now looking back, I can see that I've been running in for the last like couple of months or so that I hadn't realized until it got to a certain point where I was like, I'm not really feeling so great. The attitude I'm carrying towards my work is not the attitude I know that I have the intention to carry. And that to me was the alarm bell, like something's off here that I need to look at. For people who start that journey, my recommendation is start with the easiest things. What are the types of situations or people or dynamics that trigger big responses out of you where you can tell this is not the best version of myself coming out right now? And I know I am not acting in a way that is serving me. Whether that is when we get to the point of saying things to people that were like, this doesn't even sound like something I'd say. This is something I don't even mean at all. It's just a big emotional response. Or if you're someone who just really shuts down and you get silent when you're really upset. If you find yourself agreeing to things or going along in conversations that you know, this isn't really how I feel, but I'm noticing that I feel obligated to go along with what other people are doing or saying, and I feel icky after that. Looking for those little pockets of life where you can tell this is not how I want to be responding. This is not how I actually feel, but I can get this sense that I am being driven or pushed by something that feels a little out of control or a little bit charged or something that's not entirely my choice. That can be a beautiful entry point into seeing like where some of your triggers start to lie. So I would just say start with the easiest stuff, the stuff that you can just like really tell this is not me, this is not serving me, and bringing language to that. I think that there can be a lot of power in naming these parts. So if you can notice like the tendency, for example, to just shut down. That's one that I had. A very conflict adverse person over here. It was just something I was really uncomfortable with. So if I ever was in a situation where I felt I was being pushed into conflict or I was really unhappy about something, I did not have capacity to deal with it. So I would just shut down and go silent. I wouldn't say anything. I was just like not present anymore. And giving name to that, calling that like the ice queen, like giving that a language that when it came up, I had something to label it with that helped me disidentify from it. So I didn't feel so lost in this numbness, but it created more capacity for my awareness to come in and recognize, I know what this state of being is. I have been here before, gave some more room for me to be able to work within that and dive into what is the medicine here? What am I being asked to process? To help start moving things through in a way that was going to be productive and healthy and transmute that pain that was present when that trigger would show up.
It's important to recognize the power of naming and reclaiming, because words have the magic to transform and shape our reality. And when we name our triggers and defense mechanisms, we take away their power to control us. So bringing them into our consciousness and acknowledging them is a way to assert our authority over our own stories, rewrite our narratives with words of empowerment and liberation, And naming our triggers and defense mechanisms is a powerful act of reclaiming agency over our experiences. My question for you is, how do you think language influences one's ability to navigate and transform these patterns?
I think that is a huge part of what this work is like what you said, you're like bringing it out of the shadows, you're making it concrete, you're giving it form. That I think without language, it all feels gray and murky, and we can tell that it's there, but we don't know exactly what it is. And being able to give words to it, to put a label on it, and to be able to create scaffolding to explore the textures of what this part of self is what creates awareness where we can recognize that it's present when it's present. It can be really challenging to do so when emotions have not been, or parts of self have not been concretely sculpted out for us. In this, I'm lost in all of this that is happening within me and around me. That makes conscious choice a really difficult thing to access. But when you do have those words, and I really recommend for people to create a literal physical representation, a map of sorts to map out their trigger parts, which can look like journaling through what are the types of environments or settings that feel really challenging for me to be in, what are the types of people that I notice myself having big reactions or responses to, and noticing what do these things have in common. Are there any patterns? Are there any commonalities that I can start to whittle down? Here are the couple different types of situations or dynamics that provoke this type of response from me, and then giving that type of response, that trigger, that part, a name, and honing in what does that feel like, getting into the nuances of being able to describe to yourself what that state of being is like, so that the next time it comes up, there's so much more clarity there of, I know this space, I've been here before, to be able to work with it. Having that map can be so incredibly helpful in giving you a sense of direction. What am I meant to do with this? This is also where you can invite in having a coach or a therapist to help guide through, can be so impactful, because you're looking at patterns you've played out for your whole life. It can be really difficult to recognize when some of these things are prevalent, because there's such deep intelligence that is driving them that they can be rather sneaky and covert. And it can be challenging sometimes to recognize, are these beliefs that are charging these parts of me true? We can be under the assumption, of course, this is how the world works because this is the only way I've ever lived my life. But to have an objective person look at the tenets that you've been living your life by and being like, actually, does it have to be that way? Who does this belief sound like to you from your early life experience? Is that something that you really believe in the core of yourself, or is this something that was projected onto you that you just grafted your understanding around? Can be so helpful in helping like pop some of these bubbles of, oh, I can just let this go, or this really isn't a part of me, or this isn't something that the deepest part of myself actually believes, but I have just been conditioned to believe. That eventually works its way down to finding what are the unmet emotional needs of these parts that have been compensating around that lack of being met, that manifests in the ways that are potentially unhelpful or dysfunctional or self-sabotaging. And learning how I can meet that today is, I would say, the second big part of that. So it starts with language, is having the awareness around what is it that's going on to begin with, that gets us in the position to be able to do something about it and work with that energy and move through the conditioning and stuckness that these parts were born from.
So, in exploring the echoes of past experiences in present interactions, how do you believe sharing your insights can offer solace or a remedial balm or guidance to those struggling to navigate the complexities of their relationships and their upbringing?
Yeah, I think that's something that I wish I had heard more so at the beginning of this journey, was that there is logic and so much intelligence behind why your psyche has adapted in the way that it has. I know for me, there were so many parts of self that were showing up as incredibly dysfunctional that I felt like, what is wrong with me? Like, why is life so hard for me to move through? Now I understand there was so much intelligence around why my body behaved in the way that it did and compensated in the way that it did. That is really beautiful and magnificent to be able to recognize. Realizing that perhaps you don't have the pieces to see how it is that intelligent at the beginning, and it is in part trusting the process that as you dive into the nitty gritty of it all, it will be revealed to you how profound and how much we owe to our body for adapting in these ways and can have so much gratitude. To me, these triggers, even as dysfunctionally, especially as they showed up for me, how much I owed to them for the purpose that they served, that they were a way of manifesting safety in an environment where I had no other ropes to pull on to provide that for myself. And my body did incredible things to be able to give that sense of safety to me when I needed it most. While I didn't understand that at the beginning, learning that along the way has been something that invokes so much self-compassion and self-love and appreciation for the wisdom and the intelligence that the body holds. I think like a natural byproduct of doing this work, I would imagine it would be so hard to take a look at all these parts of self and not come away with a tremendous respect for the intelligence of your body in all that it did for you when you had no other tools to provide it for yourself. Thank God that we had that capacity, that your body had that intelligence to do it. Because would you be here today without that? Who knows where we would have ended up if our bodies didn't have this type of resource to be able to adapt in the ways that they have learned through evolution to be able to do. It is a really beautiful process, and there is logic and sense to be made out of it, even if at the beginning is probably the time where you feel the least resonant with that of I just feel so broken. None of this makes sense. My life feels so hard and I don't know why. But as someone who has been in that very much and lived a lot of life from that space of being really hard on myself and resentful of the way that my body had adapted and feeling like I couldn't break out of it no matter how much I wanted to, that through the mechanisms, through this work, on the other side of it is tremendous respect for all that my body provided for me when it had no other resources to do.
When you reflect on your early life and your early life experiences, can you identify any instances where you might have internalized certain responses or behaviors from your environment? And how do you see these echoes playing out in your present interactions?
Yeah, I think the most concrete example I have to offer is one that when I have been a huge fan of journaling my whole life, I have kept a journal since my early days of high school, even sporadically, like from the beginning of elementary school. So I have a lot of records to look back on and see the phases of life that I've worked through. And I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I very first started looking at this work for myself, was going through some old journals. And I had a journal entry where I could watch a protector taking shape, where dynamics in my life had shifted in a big way that had skewed my sense of safety. And I remember writing in this journal, if I just do everything right, and if I do all of my homework, I don't complain, I, take care of all the chores that I can do, I will be left alone. Nobody will bother me, and I will be able to fly under the radar and be okay. And that was incredible to look back on because that was so obviously a perfectionistic practice starting to come online of if I am perfect, nobody will have any reason to start conflict with me and I will be okay. That was something that I began practicing from that point forward of I have to be perfect. And there was this relentless conviction of I have to or else that felt so real, which was exhausting and eventually got me to a point of living my life by that to-do list that I mentioned earlier, where I just have to be like relentlessly pursuing goals all of the time. Once I did, there was no internal satisfaction. It was just, okay, I've kept myself at equilibrium. I feel safe. Eventually, that led me to a point of burnout and tremendous life dissatisfaction because I wasn't appreciating anything I was accomplishing and I wasn't necessarily accomplishing things that I really wanted to be working on. It was more so just the momentum of doing things and doing things to the best of my capacity that was fueling this part of myself that was only working out of a sense of feeling unsafe as a means of trying to make myself feel better. It made me miserable. My life on the outside looked wonderful. It looked great. I had accomplished some really beautiful things and taken big leaps in life, but inside it didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't happy with it. I wasn't proud of it. I was just frazzled and felt like I relentlessly had to keep moving to feel like anything was okay at all. There was no sense of joy or pride or satisfaction in any of those accomplishments. It was really interesting to see through that journal entry how clear it was why this part of myself had developed. So now looking back, that is a really incredibly intelligent thing for the body to do. That wasn't even something I was consciously so aware of. That was how I was adapting. It was just like, I think that this is going to work and I'm going to try my best to be left alone. Then it makes sense why I had that story. It makes sense to hear that story of if I do everything right, no one has any reason to come after me. That's a pretty logical way to go about attacking a problem like that. And I have respect for that is all I had within my control at that time to work with. So that's what we did. But as we said in the playing out on the adult stage, it really was not serving me at all and was making me pretty miserable. You can't control just the natural flow of how events manifest in your life, but that was the strategy of if everything is perfect, then I will feel okay when really it needs to be reversed, right? That I can feel safe within myself. I know how to regulate myself and how to feel safe regardless of what's going on around me because I am the only thing that I really have control over. And if I can navigate myself through whatever's going on around me, that is something I can count on and lean on. And it is a true sense of safety that I have control over and I can rely on. But yeah, for that, it was very much like the opposite of let me control everything around me so I can feel okay. And that leads to nothing but burnout and exhaustion.
There's a crucial difference between being controlled and being in control. Being controlled often leads us to seek external safety, while being in control means we've developed an internal sense of safety. And I think we often confuse these two states, believing we're in control when in reality we have little command over most things. In the healing process, trust and compassion are essential elements. These act as our chemical ingredients, transforming pain into wisdom and wounds into strength. This world often teaches us self doubt and harsh judgment of ourselves, and not only of ourselves, but of others. And cultivating these qualities can be really challenging. So it demands a profound act of self love and the ability to treat ourselves with the same kindness as we would treat a close friend. As you've developed self trust and compassion, how do you plan to encourage others to begin their own journey of self acceptance? How might you create a supportive community centered around these principles?
There can be a lot of wisdom gained from watching somebody walk their own path in a way that can feel really inspiring to see those shifts exist within another person and having them be like a blueprint of how much control you have over the way that you show up in life. Being that blueprint of where this work can take you, I think can be a really important pillar for people to be able to graft onto what's possible. And for me, it's just been incredible how much my life has changed since starting this work that there's so much evidence of how much has changed within me as a result of it that I think for people to hear those types of stories and resonate with, I didn't start out as someone who was incredibly self-aware and had all of these tools ready to go, but I think what makes really great teachers are people who have somewhat started from the bottom and worked through a lot to really hone these skills in a masterful way. You know, like the example, if you really struggle with math, you make a really great math teacher because you understand what gets people stuck along the way, I think has been part of my example that the things that I can share of the places that I've been and what my starting point has looked like was one that was rife with dysfunction that I think was pretty evident to see from the people around me that there was a lot of struggle there. now when I can look back and talk on that, I think people can resonate with that. They have felt those feelings and have felt that hopelessness and that stuckness of, I know this isn't serving me, but I don't really know what to do about it, is a place I lived for a really long time and can really talk about what that feels like. But to be able to see that it is moved through a bowl, that I have been able to let go of a lot of those things and not have them be controlling puppet strings of my present life experience, I think can be really hopeful. I would hope anyway for people to look at and see just how possible that this work is, that I don't feel at all like I was just a special case of someone who got lucky doing this, but was just really committed to, I can't keep living my life the way that I was. That was not an option. And just dove into this world of self exploration and how much benefit that has brought to my life. And I owe so much to. I hope can be inspiring for people to see just how possible it is and just how much change can occur when you commit to a journey like this.
That's well said. That's beautiful. And I've known you for some time now, and I've seen what you've gone through has required a huge amount of trust and self trust. And for me, that is foundational because to know anything, one must know themselves. And that's foundational in the journey of healing. How do you cultivate a sense of trust and compassion towards yourself, especially when facing challenging emotions or memories?
I think similarly to compassion, self trust feels like a natural byproduct of this process as well. And it pops up in a couple of different ways. I think one piece of that being that once you start diving into these nuanced little parts of self, these triggers, these protectors, these sub personalities, in a sense, that there is some self trust required in the conviction of this is real, this is a part of me, and taking ownership of that is like a playground where you get to start flexing this muscle that this really is part of myself and taking ownership of that. That's a unique position to be in as well because you are the only sense of authority of what that is. Nobody else can come in and tell you what your protectors or triggers are. That first starts flexing that muscle. And through that work of being able to create your own understanding of self and make it make sense in a way that works for you, that this is a really individualized experience. Nobody can tell you exactly what the textures of these different parts of self are, that this is something only you can create. And putting in the work to start transmuting that energy of trying out different methodologies of how to do it and playing with what feels good, what doesn't feel good, I think continues to work that muscle of self-trust where you're learning to have relationship with yourself in a much more deep and meaningful way. The natural byproduct of that coming online is your body learning to reconnect with you and open to you and give you more evidence and more content of what it's trying to communicate. Once it feels like you're really starting to listen, the body opens up in an incredible way. It's really common for people who don't have many memories of their childhood once they start doing this work and the body feels like, oh, you're ready to listen to me now. Will open up and you'll start accessing memories and pain points and experiences that you had completely forgotten had ever existed. That your body, when it feels comfortable enough, will feel ready to share and explore with you. And developing that relationship is the bedrock of self trust, that I have a relationship with myself, at least for me, has been, yeah, the bedrock of my experience of self trust. That it is very much a relationship with my body where it feels like we're like two entities working together that create self trust. That when I'm having a response to something, that my cognitive mind will come in and take that seriously and want to process that information and meet me where I'm at, rather than what I think a lot of people's default is something arises within them. And if it feels overwhelming or it doesn't make sense, that then it gets suppressed and squashed back down. And of course, that teaches the body that, okay, it's not safe for me to express. So I'm just going to keep things to myself and lock things down and let them bubble and manifest and pop out in dysfunctional ways. That only further continues to bother the mind and frustrate the mind and create that inner resentment. But yeah, this work, I think it just naturally develops that sense of connection with the subconscious, the emotional body, and the conscious mind that I think a lot of us would relate to that being more our sense of self, bringing those two things together and learning how to work together in navigating the world and having respect for what each of those things bring to the table, the intelligence that they have to share, and taking them seriously to make decisions and to act in alignment and move through life as partners.
Your words resonate deeply, and I really appreciate your perspective because your work highlights the importance of exploring our inner world, which often gets overshadowed by external concerns. And when we turn inward and navigate the complex maze of our minds, amidst the clamour of competing thought, we can uncover some of our deepest truths. The internal journey requires attentive listening, keen observation, and a sensitivity to the subtle shifts in our thoughts and emotions. So practices like meditation can be extremely valuable for this exploration. I've learned to differentiate between thoughts rooted in fear and those stemming from love, between protective instincts and the drive for growth. And this skill allows me to navigate towards greater self-understanding and a greater sense of freedom. By examining the various qualities and textures of my thoughts, I gain valuable insights into my internal processes. My question to you is, are there any specific types of thoughts or voices within you that you've learned to distinguish? How do you navigate and engage with these different aspects?
I think meditation can be a beautiful space to do that exploration, to really feel into the different textures that different types of thoughts and parts can hold. That's something I've definitely noticed within myself, is that when different parts of self come online that are either acting in true alignment in a way that feels good and nurturing and is taking steps in the right direction for how I want to be living, or parts of self that are acting more so out of fear, compensation, these parts of self that are just trying to keep me safe. There is a world there to be explored of the different type of textures that those thoughts hold. And I do use the word texture very intentionally, that there is a sense of feeling that is associated with these thoughts that is really helpful in being able to distinguish what parts of self are present within me at that moment, to help figure out, okay, is this something I actually want to be working towards, or is this a part of self that a voice that needs a little bit of compassion and reassurance that everything's okay, to let the voices of truth and alignment come through more clearly. For me, for example, when I notice that something is being driven out of fear, there's almost like a fuzzy tingliness to those sense of thoughts, to the quality of those thoughts that I experience, where there feels like there's a little bit of a sense of urgency, the tingliness of like hypervigilance. If you're just like very aware that there's a shaky energy to that experience, very much comes online for me when I have those types of thoughts that are driven out of fear and lack. When I can notice, oh, that's part of what I'm experiencing as I'm having these thoughts, that gives me these cues of what I need to do to adapt to meet these parts where they are, which is taking that kind of objective stance of really resourcing into that objective witness perspective and
Yeah.
looking at these parts objectively. Okay, there's just something here that is looking for reassurance, looking for love, looking for safety, and recognizing is all that it is, that maybe this part says something it wants to let me know. Make sure that you think about these types of things that could go wrong. Okay, thank you very much for that information. And I will do what I need to do with that information to best navigate whatever it is that I'm working through. Giving that part what it needs to feel like, okay, I have been heard, I've been taken seriously, and being met with respect, I think, is a big part of this too, to be able to accept these parts of self and not just once they come up, oh, this is a trigger, this is an undeveloped part of self, get out of here, I don't need to listen to you. But there's a lot of intelligence, as we've been talking about, that causes these things to pop up, and giving them the respect that they deserve or the intelligence that they were born out of. They are here for a reason with something to teach you, whether that is valuable information of, oh, I hadn't considered that is good for me to know, or recognizing maybe there's some work for me to do here around perfectionism, for example. Either one of those things are really important pieces of information for me to be made aware of, and having gratitude for that part, and giving it what it needs so that it can feel like, okay, I have been recognized and addressed and it feels safe for me to go now. That these parts will leave once they feel like they have been addressed, and you can sit back into your spaciousness and, act in the way that you feel best aligns with what you want. That can be a really important place to explore in, is feeling into those textures of these different parts of self. What does it feel like when you're in true alignment? For me, it feels open and easy, just like leaning back into a chair and letting myself be carried is what those thoughts feel like to me. That there's a lot of spaciousness there, that when it exists, I can recognize, oh, this is the path I want to be walking down. And I can have that sense of confidence and self-trust that this is what it is I want to do. Similarly to what I mentioned earlier, of the thoughts that kind of feel a little bit more prickly, a little bit more forced, that there's like a push behind me to get me to do things rather than an easeful pull. Of what alignment feels like for me is a really important tool that I use all the time in being able to help differentiate what parts of self, what type of quality of information that I'm being given by my body to make decisions.
There's a stark contrast between forcing your way through life and being guided by a clear vision of what's necessary. Your journey towards embodied awareness is admirable, demonstrating remarkable courage and compassion, and it takes real strength to fully embrace the entire spectrum of human experience. You've shown a willingness to listen to your body's subtle cues and honor its inherent wisdom. And this approach has led to significant personal growth and healing, as evidenced by your lived experience. And your practical hands-on knowledge gives you credibility and depth. People are likely to connect with your work and your personal evolution. There's a powerful attraction when others sense a genuine resonance. Even if their experiences differ, they can relate to elements of your journey, creating a strong connection. As we come to the conclusion of this episode, Ginny, where can people find you, and do you have any parting words for the audience?
So I am on Instagram at Ginny Hoyt, and I have a website, www.ginnyhoyt.com, that has all of my offerings and a little more information about myself and my story on there. As far as parting words, I feel like a broken record with it, but it is just a message that the resonance never wears off for me. Is there is so much intelligence and wisdom that exists in your body, and learning to give it some respect for how hard and for how long it has tried to show up for you and do the best that it had the resource to do is something that I think is really underappreciated by a lot of people. So if there's something you can do to yourself today that just gives yourself a little bit more tender love and care for this body, do it.
Ginny, it's never a broken record, because people need to hear that again and again till it seeps into their sinews and seeps into their neurology. Many a time we have to hear things again and again for the content to sink in. So I appreciate that. And as we draw to the end of this episode, because we're going to be back next week, but this episode has been about embodied awareness, I'm reminded of the profound wisdom that resides within every single one of us. Through the exploration of what Ginny has presented in terms of somatics, we've peeled back the layers of conditioning and beliefs, which shines a light on the hidden stories that shape our lives. And we've learned to embrace our triggers as gateways to deeper self-understanding and to cultivate self-trust and compassion as we navigate the intricate landscape of our inner world. But our journey doesn't end there, and our journey doesn't end here either. So as we all step back into the world, let's carry the lessons we've learned, weaving them into the fabric of our daily lives. And let's continue to listen deeply to the whispers of our body and honor the wisdom that they hold, and embrace the fullness of our human experience. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, Ginny, for sharing your wisdom and your insights. I want to invite you to continue to explore the depths of your inner landscape, knowing that the path to healing and transformation lies within. So until next time, May you always walk in beauty and in wisdom. Thank you, Ginny.